Hodge On Nodge podcast. With your host, Hodgeythehack.
A very warm welcome to the first Hodge On Nodge podcast. First lesson in podcast land is take yourself off mute when you want to present your guest. And by the way, I am excited for this debut podcast. And do you know why? Because I have an absolute belter of a guest. Without any further ado, welcoming former Norwich City boss Alex Neil, who's sporting a tan befitting of not really a Scotsman, mate. How have you managed to get that in this weather?
Just well pressing, really. Obviously, with lockdown, I haven't managed to get away, but it's been nice for a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I'm nicely bronzed up.
Aye, no, it's excellent. In terms of like the whole sort of lockdown thing, how have you kind of been handling that? Because I think everybody's had it a bit hard over the last sort of year and stuff. How's it been?
Well, I can't really complain because for the majority of the time we've been working, so it keeps you occupied. You get out of the house, you get to work, you do your job, and yeah, it's not been too bad. I think it's been more difficult for the kids than that. You know, they've been off school and try and occupy themselves in the house all the time. So, but yeah, not too bad for us. We've been quite fortunate.
Has it been nice for you to get a break? See the Wains a wee bit more? Obviously, football schedule, particularly in the Championship's really demanding and time-wise. So, has it been nice for you to have a wee bit more time in the house?
Yeah, but I think the pandemic, everybody was in limbo, really. We didn't know what was going on. You know, we didn't know what the next step was, when it was going to come. So, yeah, I think I enjoyed that time, really. You know, it gave us a little bit of a break. And now, obviously, I'm on a little bit of an enforced break. So, yeah, got a bit of time to spend with the kids, which is great.
Superb. Right, let's kick off with the actual podcast stuff. So I want to talk a bit about you. So people that don't really sort of know your career pre-Norwich City maybe don't know much about what you were like as a player. Now, you were, in my opinion, the definition of a midfield general, just barking orders at everybody around about you and making sure that the whole thing kind of, like the whole system works, basically the nexus that all the planets can orbit round about. Now, with that in mind, did you always have it in your head that you were going to be a manager? Like, was that always the sort of the progression you expected to make? Or like, did it just kind of come about, obviously, with the way situation went at Hamilton?
No, it just sort of happened. It wasn't something that I'd planned for. If I'm being honest, I'd planned to sort of... Billy Reid was the manager at the time, and my hope was, because I had a couple of bad hip injuries towards the end in my career, probably about 28-ish, I had a couple of bad hip injuries and I was out for quite a while. And Billy, to be fair, gave me a chance to start coaching. So I was taking the 17s and then I moved up into the under-20s and I was doing that. So my plan really was to coach under Billy. You know, I hadn't thought about managing at all. If I was potentially going to manage, I would have thought it would have been maybe 10 years' time beyond when I'd actually started.
Really, that long? That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at most, I think my career's been quite strange in the fact that I know I might not look it, but I'm not even 40 yet. You know, I'm not 40 to next month.
Easy paper run, Alec.
Yeah, exactly. And I've managed about 500 games. So, yeah, it sort of it happened a hell of a lot quicker than what I'd even thought, because I hadn't thought about it. And I found myself really fortunate, to be honest, in terms of getting the opportunity. And everything went, certainly at the start, everything went remarkably well for quite a long period of time. It was about 3 years. I found myself managing in the Scottish Championship to basically, I think it was two and a half years later, I was managing the Premier League in England.
Aye, it was a meteoric rise. I mean, that's definite.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, with that in mind, do you think it all kind of happened a bit too quickly? Maybe a bit of the victim of your own success in a way?
Yeah, I think now as you get older and you can reflect more, then certainly, you know, I think it all happened so quickly. But the simple fact is, though, I'd earned the right to be there, you know, because I'd earned promotion with Hamilton. We then went on and started the season extremely successfully. I then went to Norwich mid-season, and we put an unbelievable run together to get ourselves promoted. So it was one of these strange ones that you just sort of run with it and ride with it. I mean, there isn't really anything in your brain at that point that's thinking, oh, hold on, this is happening too quick. You just sort of go with it and think, this is what seems to be going, and I just embraced it, really.
How come you took so naturally to it, do you think? Like, I mean, I obviously kind of made the wee quip there about you being a midfield general, but it's a very different thing managing a team on the park to managing a team off the park. So how come you think you sort of took to it so naturally and had such success early on?
I think, like you said, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a midfield general, but what I would say was...
How would you describe yourself then?
I don't really know. I think that's a difficult question to ask someone. You know what I mean?
Because it's for other folk to say, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wouldn't like to see myself sort of visualise myself blowing my own trumpet type thing. So I think where my strength probably lay was the effect that I had on others rather than what I actually did as a player, if that makes any sense.
No, totally. It's the Roy Keane thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that I influenced other people around me by barking out orders or whatever you want to call it, organising, talking, the sort of leadership skills. So, and to be fair, Billy Reid was a massive part of that because he encouraged me to be that type. Like Billy made me captain, I think, when I was about 24, and that really was the turning point in my career. You know,
how so?
Well, because at Barnsley I was there, but I played quite a few games. I played over 100 games at Barnsley, but then I went to Mansfield, got a bit of a shock because I had to drop down a level. And I thought to myself, I need to basically get my finger out a little bit. And then when I got the captaincy, responsibility changed me quite a lot, I think. You know, because I think to that point I was quite a selfish player. I would just play for myself and wanted to play. Like a lot of players, I think. I mean, because although it's a team game, you're self-employed as a footballer. I mean, the simple fact is, if you're part of a team, which is great, but if you're not playing, it can be quite a lonely place at times if you're a player. I mean, because there's 25, 30 lads in that changing room, and if you're not one that's featuring regularly, then it's not a good feeling.
No, granted. Now, you mentioned Billy Reid. Was he the biggest influence in terms of your career, looking towards the sort of that transition to management? Was he the biggest influence? Was there a lot you kind of borrowed for him? Or did you take sort of different bits from different experiences you'd had? Did you look to sort of the likes of your Sir Alex Ferguson's, I don't know, going back, Jock Stein, anybody like that? I mean, was there any particular sort of people that you tried to borrow from and base your managerial approach on? Or was it very much your kind of identikit sort of thing?
No, I think what you do, well, I can only really speak for myself, but I would surmise that anybody would do the same. I think it's really extremely difficult to replicate anyone. You know, I think because you don't know how they're going to react in certain circumstances, albeit you've been exposed to it. But I think you certainly couldn't replicate a Sir Alex Ferguson, for instance. Well, no. For one, I was never in his company. So all I'm really doing is based on what my interpretation of what he would do if I tried to do that. So I think what you do is you pick up little bits for everybody that you've worked from, things that you would probably like, things that you didn't like, and then you try and implement that. But I think there's another thing, particularly when you're starting, is your personality and your character will always come through. You know, and that's something that irrespective of who you worked with and who you try to cherry pick things off of, you aren't going to be similar to them as a person a lot of the time. I mean, your personality traits are going to be different. And I think certainly to start with, I was certainly probably more, I wasn't as sort of probably thoughtful, and even to a certain extent laid back now. I'm certainly more laid back now than what I was then when I started. You know, but see, the strange thing with that is, I think if I didn't have that trait at that time, I'm not sure how successful I would have been. So it was a probably necessary evil for me, because you've got to remember, when I took my first job, I was 31. To try and respect out of players who, some of which are older than us. I had Jason Scotland, who'd played in the Premier League in England and was a terrific player. And he was 5 years older than me. And I'm dropping him out of the team and telling him how to play. And I mean, and even when I moved to Norwich, it was very, very similar. You know, a lot of guys that had played at a better level than I was managed to play at, and I had to organise them and try and put my point across to them. That's what I do.
That's a really interesting point. So, in terms of that, what was it about your character that allowed you to kind of transcend that, do you think? Because you're right, someone that's sort of come from Hamilton Accies and that kind of thing, playing sort of at a lower level in England, suddenly, due to that meteoric rise, managing Premier League players, international stuff like that. How do you manage to transcend that?
I didn't really care, if I'm being honest. No, but that's probably the best way to describe it. In terms of meeting better players or bigger players or players who had achieved a lot, or like their standing or their how people would perceive them didn't really bother me. Do you know what I mean? As far as I was concerned, when I walked, they were another player. And don't get me wrong, over the course of time, you create relationships with players as you go on, so you judge them in regards to your relationship with them rather than whether they were a good player or not. You know, it's but I think the one thing I did have in my favour was that I wasn't really bothered. I was just so driven in trying to make the best of an opportunity that presented itself for me. You know, and that's basically where it stemmed from.
So let's talk about that opportunity presenting itself. How did the Norwich thing come about? So obviously you'd taken Accies to sort of unforeseen heights. I can't even remember the number of years it was, but it was the first one at Celtic Park in forever. Third in the Scottish Premiership, which, well, due respect to Hamilton Accies, is well above the level they should be operating at. So, I mean, with that, how did the Norwich thing come about? How did the club first make contact and approach?
It's quite a strange story because he's obviously one of my best mates now. But I had a player in my system at Hamilton, and his uncle contacted me and says, "Listen, can I come in to see you?" So, and he was an agent at the time, so I presumed that he was going to come in and talk about his nephew. So when he came in to speak to me, I had my assistant with me because I brought him in just for experience. Because both of us, to be honest, at that point, we hadn't had a lot of experience. You know, we'd gained promotion at that stage, but I wanted to include him in things as much as I could. So when he came in the office, he just sat down and he says, "Can I speak to you privately?" So then my mind starts racing right away, and I'm thinking, this isn't just a normal friendly chat about how's he doing, blah, blah, blah. So I got Frankie to leave, and then he just said to me, he says, "Have you got an agent?" And I says, "No, I don't." He says, "Well, I've potentially got interest in terms of would you be interested in going elsewhere?" And then he obviously mentioned the Norwich thing. And to be honest, I didn't believe him to start with.
I think it was a wind-up.
Yeah, I did, yeah. I thought it was a wind-up. And I think he thought that, he obviously knew I did because he says, "Listen, obviously my nephew's here, I'm not going to come to you with this if it's not going to have any sort in terms of fruition at the end of it." And that's how it sort of came about. And then obviously I was at a game with Ronnie, and we got a phone call from Norwich to Ronnie, who was obviously owned the Hamilton, and just requested that they could talk to me. And to be fair to Ronnie, I mean, like, I've still got, like, Ronnie, I've always got on great with Ronnie. You know, I still talk to Ronnie regularly. And he basically came over, sat down, and he says, basically, it looks like you're going down to Norwich to speak to them. And didn't even bat an eyelid in terms of, like, should you go or should you? It was basically a case of Norwich were on the phone, let's get you ready and get you down there and speak to them, see what they're saying.
Well, that's brilliant that you had that kind of support, and I think they must have had the thing that they couldn't really stand in your way. But you bring up the topic of wind-ups, so that makes me think, like, what's the best wind-up you've ever been a part of, either as the victim or the perpetrator?
If I've been honest, I'm not that type. I don't really subject anybody to wind-ups.
Right, so what's the best one you've seen then? Must be a good story or two in the vault.
Yeah, I think the ones that I've seen that have probably been the best ones are always the ones where other players phone somebody up, kidding on they're a manager of some kind, saying, "Listen, we're interested in you." And particularly if you're at a smaller club and they're pretending they're somebody for a bigger club, and the players are like, yeah, I'll meet you. Where do you want me to go? And do you know what I mean? All that sort of stuff. But I was certainly as a player, like I say, I was probably quite highly strung as a player. I was probably intense is the right word. You know what I mean? I was really focused, and I tried to lead by example. And yeah, I didn't really get involved in that sort of stuff so much.
The tomfoolery of these kind of people. No, fair enough.
I didn't mind it, and I liked a night out as much as anybody else. But when it came to playing, I was very serious.
Do you think it's an important part of a dressing room, though, to have that sort of frivolity and kind of joviality among the characters, and to have a few folk that are just architects of nonsense?
Yeah, of course I do. I think that you need those types, but equally you need the other types as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you've just got that all throughout your group, focus can be something that's hard to then like apply when you need to. But equally, I think if it's too serious, then you naturally need a bit of enjoyment and a bit of relaxation. And well, I'm sure you'll have mates they'll naturally bring that when they're in the company. I mean, they don't even need to try. That's just the type of person that they are. And I think it's difficult to change the type of person you are. And unfortunately, that's I think that's just my makeup.
No, granted, right. So, just sticking on that for a wee minute. Norwich City, who were the kind of more sensible-headed ones during your time there, and who were the biggest wind-up merchants?
Most sensible ones. I'd probably put Russell there because obviously Russell was captain, and was I'd say Russell was very level-headed. Trying to think. Johnny Howson was very level-headed. You know, John Dozza, I think, was a bit of a wind-up merchant when he went out and things, but was quite quiet and about the place.
Really? He didn't strike me as the type, actually.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I think if he's out and about, he can get a little bit lively but he's but no, he was very quiet and about the place. I mean, got about his work the right way and was very good. So,
right, wind-up merchants. Come on.
I'd probably say I'm not even sure Wes was a wind-up merchant. I don't even know if I put him in that category.
He's funny though. Like he's got a good sense of humour.
Yeah. He's very laid back, Wes. You know what I mean in terms of how he goes about his stuff.
Loves doing the press as well. Favourite thing in the world.
Oh, yeah. You're lucky to get 2 words out of him. Big Seb was all right, but within his own group type thing. You know, I think that, yeah, to be honest, I'm casting my mind back now because it's quite a few years since I've been with the lads. But yeah, they were a good group. I mean, well, as they evidently showed. I mean, in terms of what they produced.
Aye. So what was the kind of constitution of the dressing room when you arrived then? And like, was there an immediate impact that you had when you got there in terms of like? Well, I mean, the results would say yes, there was, because obviously there was that meteoric run to Wembley. But in terms of the actual, I mean, we're talking about characters, we're talking about types of people, we're talking about that side of it. How did your character kind of influence the team, do you think? What do you think you brought that managed to inspire that run and that success?
I think I probably brought a level of intensity that wasn't quite there at that time. You know,
right.
a level of focus, a level of determination, probably aggression, to be honest. You know, I think the characteristics are something that I naturally had as a player, when it came to football. So, yeah, I would probably say that. Organisation, you know, like you say, I was more a sort of dictator on the pitch in terms of telling people where to go. So that side of it came quite easily for me. And players at that level don't need taught how to play football. Aye. You know, you hear a lot of the top managers saying that. You don't teach Wes Hoolahan how to control the ball. Do you know what I mean? He's a magician in those type of areas. So what you need to do is get him into those type of areas as often as you can and let his sort of quality do the rest, if you like. You know, and I think that one of the biggest things that I had to do, and I remember my first home game, obviously the first game was Bournemouth, which I spent in the stand in the first half and then sort of came down. But
why did you come down, by the way? Because a few folk have mentioned that to me, and they said that you were standing kicking every ball on the sidelines.
Yeah, well, what happened was Johnny Howson gets sent off. So Mike Phelan and Holt were doing the meeting the night before the game, which I got involved in, which I didn't intend to, but I did because I couldn't help myself. And the next day, I think it was about 30 minutes in, Johnny gets sent off. And I was just looking down, and I could see them looking up at me as if like, what would he want us to do type thing? And I'm thinking, well, I don't even really know anybody. So I went down to the sidelines to try and help. And I think I had Alex Tetty playing right back. I had Cameron Jerome playing wide left. I literally went to the players. So I moved people about, and I didn't know who they were. But I could tell just by the 30 minutes that I'd seen what type they were in terms of, well, he can tackle, he can run, he can do this, he can do that. And it ended up that Cameron cut in, scored the winner, and we managed to win that game. But I think my first game was at home, I think it was Cardiff, and we were winning 3-0, and they came back to 3-2. And the one thing that stood out to me right away was I think we needed to strengthen the back line. You know, I think we had Russell, I think Martin Olsen, I think it was Stephen Whittaker and maybe Michael Turner. But Seb Bassong was on loan to Watford at the time, who were above us in the league.
That's an interesting situation. Seb Bassong's an interesting one as well, because I think, did you leave him out for the first 3 games? And then I was speaking to NCFC Numbers, who's got loads of good Norwich stats, and he said he started 51 or 52 after that. What was it about Seb that kind of caught your eye?
Well, he wasn't there. He was at Watford, like I say. So I was looking at their squad, and I'm thinking, I probably need to strengthen that position. And then when I started looking at the players that I had, I noticed that Seb Bassong was out on loan to Watford, and he was playing every game, and they were doing really well. He was playing left-sided centre-back, and I thought, I need to bring him back. But there'd obviously been a little bit of previous before that there'd been a bit of breakdown in relationships and communication, and Seb had been put out on loan. So that was something that I had to try and repair between some of the players and to give us the best chance. And to be fair, when I sat some of the lads down, I said to them, listen, our best chance, we need to bring him back, because he's going to give us a better opportunity getting up, and you need to sort of bury the hatchet for the greater good type thing. And to be fair, they embraced that and they got on with it.
And that's an important part as a manager, is kind of mending those bridges and sort of doing that. That's an example, I suppose, of the kind of impact you had early on. Russell Martin obviously springs to mind for this next question as one of the sort of true kind of architects of the dressing room culture and things like that. But were there anybody else you kind of relied on as your sort of lieutenants in there, really setting the standard and in terms of that intensity that you speak of?
Yeah, I think there's lieutenants that do it by influencing others, and I think there's lieutenants that do it by playing as well as they can, if that makes sense. So
Totally.
Johnny Howson, for instance, Johnny wasn't a player that really influenced other players. He more took care of his own bit. But if Johnny performed as well as he could, he would have a massive impact on the game. You know, and so you would sort of feed into John, because, you know, John could have a big influence because he was a very good player. Nathan Redmond was similar. You know, Nathan was only young at the time. When he was on it, it was a big threat for us. Wes Hulham was another one. But then you had other guys who could influence others, like, say, Russell was a good example. You had Lewis Graben, who was a fundamental part, really, of the success at the start, and then we lost Lewis to an ankle injury, and that gave Cameron the opportunity to come in and finish the season strongly for us. So then you had Bradley Johnson, who was very influential both on and off the pitch. You know, I'd probably say Bradley was a bit of a joker, actually, the more I think about it.
He seems the type.
He was a very good character in about the changing room.
So, of the kind of, let's call them 3 groups across the 3 seasons. What did you think was the most talented group of the Norwich players that you had, and is that the standout most talented group that you've ever worked with?
It's hard to say. It's really, really difficult to say, because I think there was a lot of players there that were very talented. And what will happen now is, because some of the players have went on and done really well, then people think of them as they are at the moment rather than what they were then.
Yes.
So your Ben Godfreys and your James Maddisons and guys like that who are terrific players and went on and done extremely well. At that point, though, like young Ben, when I signed Ben, we got him for York for 100 grand. You know what I mean? So he was only a kid at the time, really, albeit he's turned into a terrific player now. Young James was similar. James actually the year we signed James, he broke his ankle that season and hadn't played a lot of football. I mean, he broke his ankle for Coventry, so I think he just came back and he'd featured in maybe like 2 games. And we signed James that summer, and then leading into that next season, obviously James has went on and really flourished and became a top player since then.
Aye, well, Maddison's a really interesting one. So just to speak about him, he obviously went on, and not a great deal of time after you left the football club, went on to become Norwich City's record sale, and I mean, absolutely flourished at Championship level. Now, obviously, the Premier League, I can totally see the sort of argument, but what was it about him that you felt wasn't ready? Because obviously went up to Aberdeen, showed, in terms of the Scottish Premiership, sublime talent. And if you're shown it at that level of the Scottish Premiership, it would suggest that if you can do it at the top end there, you can maybe do it in the Championship.
This is where memories are frayed. I remember, well, it is, because this is true. I remember having a conversation. I phoned Derek McInnes at Aberdeen at the time, and James wasn't getting a game. Mm-hmm. So you read all these articles about how Dale and James, and they still speak, and that he'd been playing, and James wasn't playing. I phoned Derek McInnes about the December, and he hadn't played for about 4 or 5 matches, and he was talking about how he had to do a little bit more work off the ball and learn that side of the game and blah, blah, blah. And then James came back in January and basically told me, I don't want to go back to Aberdeen. I mean, I want to stay here. I want to fight for my place. I want to play for Norwich. At that point in time, though, we had Wes, who obviously was starting to get older, and naturally was going to be a transfer of sort of powers, if you like. We also had Alex Pritchard, who was there at that point, who was a good performer for Norwich when he played. With the 2 Murphys coming through at the same time, who were on the flanks. I think we just sold Nathan that summer. But what you needed to remember is, see the year that we came down, when you came down with a team, particularly David McNally had left, Jez Moxey had come in, and then the club had decided that Jez wasn't right for them, and then Jez had moved on. Behind the scenes wasn't quite settled, shall we say, because David had left a massive vacuum when he left before we came down. But James was an excellent player. But if you look at that following season with how much impact and how well he did, you had James, 2 Murphys who both moved to the Premier League. That team finished 14th. You know what I mean? And when I left, we were 8th. The simple fact is, I couldn't afford, because we came down with that team, I was never going to be given a 14th position finish. I was going to leave before that. So, I left when we were 8th. So the point I'm making is, though, although James and the Murphys and all that were excellent players, they weren't ready to get the team back up that season. And my job and responsibility was to try and get the team straight back up. And if I didn't, I was ultimately going to lose my job off the back here. So that's
a fair point.
We had a conversation at the start of the season with the hierarchy of the club. And I said to them, and I commented on this quite a bit, and I think it got taken that I was criticising the team or criticising the players at the time, which I wasn't. And now in reflection, I think I can go back to it and address it a bit more. But I was talking about the team getting too old at that point, and that I'd spoke about. And that's why some of the signings I made were James, were the likes of Ben Godfrey. I mean, but we're starting to bring some of the younger players in, because the team at that point, a lot of them were in their 30s. Do you know what I mean? The likes of Dozer, the likes of Russell, the likes of Alex, the likes of Johnny Howson, Bradley Johnson. A lot of the lads were getting older and older as we were going on, said the song. So that was something that needed addressing. And to be honest, I think since I've left, I think Norwich have done that remarkably well in terms of continually chipping the age of the squad down and bringing fresh, younger ones in. And we'd spoke about a strategy at the start of that season about, because we actually done a whole sort of dossier that I put together, talking about how many games it takes for young players to start being effective. And we used the likes of Anthony Knockhart, I think was at Leicester at the time, and what it showed with nearly all young players, they need about 100 games before they can start really being effective at the level that they're playing at. And unfortunately for us, I think the Murphys had played about maybe 30, 40 games at the time. James had played about 50, 60 games at the time. And what I was saying to them was, listen, these are the next batch, but if we play them, they're not ready to get us up at the moment. So if our outcome for this season is we need to go straight back up, these kids are not ready to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in a year or two's time, you'll reap the benefits of how good these will be. And the conversation I wanted to, we want to go straight back up. And I said, yeah, I understand that. And that's why the lads at that point in time maybe didn't play as much. Because when you go to any club, there's different parameters and different expectations of what you're trying to do. If you go in somewhere and say that you're floundering in the league or whatever, they might say to you, right, listen, we need to build a team that's going to be really effective in a couple of years' time. And then you put the building blocks together. And then I knew going into Norwich, right, you're coming in. Well, I think they were 10th or 11th in the league at that point. We want to go up. So I just need to win. I mean, whatever how you do it, you need to win the games. And that at that time was a little bit different. But like you say, James, listen, you just need to look at James as a player, you know, and I'm sure a lot of the Norwich fans will look and say, well, we had him for longer and didn't get to see his talent, and that's frustrating for them. And I get that. I really do get that. But I just...
But, I mean,
sorry,
I was just going to say, me and you both know sometimes there's a bit of snobbery in England about the Scottish football, all of that kind of stuff. But I'm a great believer that spell at Aberdeen might have made James Maddison, because it showed him that his technique wouldn't get him everywhere. You know what I mean? And it showed him that the hard sort of blood and snotters of Scottish football, like that can have, especially in a player that's a technician like James Maddison, that can be the difference maker. Also, if you're not getting in Aberdeen's team, that creates a hunger. That creates a hunger and a desire to improve.
I think if you were to ask James, I think James wouldn't change his path for the world, because it's got him to where he is. You know, and I think getting things handed to you too easily can be to your detriment at times. And I think the fact that he had to work harder to get into that team and be so effective. And I think people had a misconception as well that me or James or me and James didn't really get on. That's entirely not true. I spoke to James since I left on a few occasions about different things. So my relationship with James was good. My relationship with his agent was good. So yeah, there was no issues there. There was no issues there at all. And he's shown now how good a player, or how much a talent he has got.
Granted, now you touched on the let's call it the sporting structure behind the scenes. You mentioned Jez Moxey, David McNally. I suppose first question is, how was your relationship with both of those guys, and were you happy with the support they gave you in terms of recruitment at the respective stages? More so David probably with that second part.
Yeah, I had a great relationship with David. David was very matter of fact, very driven, very intense as well. So no, that relationship was great. You know, he gave me the opportunity to come down, which I'm forever grateful for. I think I repaid that by getting the team promoted for a position point looked unlikely. So yeah, no, we had a very good relationship. And obviously David leaving the club, I had no bearing on that whatsoever. That was something that just...
Were you disappointed, like, if it sort of turned out that way?
Hugely, because he was, although I had a great relationship with Delia and Michael, they left the running of the club to David. You know, he was the guy that basically ran the club for top table at that point. And he was sorely missed, in my opinion. You know, he was so, because that vacuum was left there for quite a bit of time, even to the end of that season. And they did try and obviously fill it with people who were there, but it didn't really work. And then the difficulty we had is we hired Jez, who I got on with well, and had no issues with whatsoever. And I don't know what happened. It was a strange scenario with Jez, because they seemed to come in and sort of be given the job. And normally when you're given a job, what you do is you go in, you assess, and then you start to say, right, this is what I need to do, and you put your plan together. And by the time Jez seemed to get to the stage where he was wanting to put his plan together, I think the club had just decided that, right, we're not going to go with your plan. So it was a really quite strange time at that point. So you'd appointed somebody who, well, certainly when David was there, was the most influential and strongest in terms of power at the club, without doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And Jez got put in that position, but then got his power sort of stripped of him before he left. So it was quite strange in that sense. I don't really, if I'm being honest, I couldn't tell you what happened with that.
Did it impact, like, I mean, or I suppose a better question than did it impact is, did you manage to sort of fully shelter the kind of the first team, the dressing room, the football side from that? And if so, was that a new challenge to you? How did you circumnavigate that?
Yeah, it was certainly a new challenge, because I think that David had been there for 7 years, so it was so embedded in how he worked things and how he did things, and everybody knew that David was in charge. Do you know what I mean? The players knew David was in charge, the staff knew David was in charge. And then when you go for having such a strong character to there being a vacuum left, it's a really, really strange thing. People are vying to fill that vacuum, aren't they? You know, that's natural. So you've got other players going on all over the place trying to influence different things. But yeah, no, it was strange, but I couldn't really tell you whether I shielded players for it or not. It wasn't really something we spoke about a lot. You know, with David leaving, if I'd spoke to anybody about it, it'd probably been more Russell because he was the captain, but not to any great length, because, to be honest, it was more between David and the owners at that point than anything else. I mean, I wasn't really involved in it. Jez as well was more between the owners and Jez. I wasn't really involved in that. So yeah, it was a strange time off the pitch. So,
fair play. I want to touch upon the kind of pinnacle period. So I don't know if you know this, you got more points for your first 10 games than any other Norwich City manager in history with 25. You're also the only manager who's won 8 of their first 10 games in charge. Now, that was the springboard for a historic run. Now, if you're a Norwich City fan and you're going to write a playoff winning run, then it's going to involve beating Ipswich, and it's going to involve a historic day at Wembley. Now, talking about Wembley, well, actually, let's deal with the Ipswich stuff first. So those were arguably the most important and most intense derby clashes in the history of the East Anglian Derby. Now, how did you find that? Obviously, you come from Scotland, where you've got the Old Firm derby, so you know about high fever derbies, Lanarkshire, Hamilton, and Motherwell, all of that. But how did you find that experience and the intensity of it, like, in terms of the just how important, how much was riding on those games, and like, at that point, was that your biggest sort of thing as a manager that you'd experienced?
Probably a difficult situation. I think, see, when you grow up in the west of Scotland and you've been exposed to Celtic and Rangers, people talk about intensity in derbies and what it means to people and the burden and the pressure that comes with it. I think even if you're a fan of one of the Old Firm, I don't think you'll experience anything like the Old Firm anywhere else.
Boca River Plate, maybe.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I couldn't tell you about that one because it's so far away. But in terms of, I think anything in Britain, in my opinion, if you've been exposed, whether you're a fan, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whatever, if you go to an Old Firm derby and realise what it means to people, I think every other old derby that you'll be involved in, you'll look at it and you'll think, yeah, it's really good and it's everybody wants to win, but I'm not sure you can replicate the like. There's families that don't talk to each other in Scotland because
I know fine well, mate.
and what you need to understand is I've been brought up right in the middle of that all my life. Do you know what I mean? Throughout the family, my family are love football, like top to bottom. So if there was Old Firm on, it got watched or they'd be at it or whatever. So I think when you go down, and like I said, and I would take this to the games as much as the players. When I went down, no game really fazed me. If I'm being honest, I'd probably say the most nervous I've been before a game was probably before we played Hibs in the second leg at Hamilton.
Why was that? Just because it was so early in your career?
Because it meant so much to me. Because Hamilton was my club. Hamilton
Aye.
gave me everything that I basically had as a player and as a coach. Because without Hamilton, I wouldn't have had Wembley. I wouldn't have had the opportunity. So Hamilton, and not only that, I built relationships with people there over 9 years. That's a long time in football to be at one club. And yeah, that meant everything to me. That was probably the most that I had. When I went to Norwich, obviously, it meant everything at the time. But yeah, if I'm being honest, I never had any doubts that we wouldn't do it.
Why?
I don't know. Because I think to that point, everything that I'd done to that point, we just went and got it done, and that was it. It was really, yeah, well, yeah. So we were losing to Hibs 2-0 in the first leg at home and went to Easter Road. And literally, I think the first ball went up to Jason Scotland and he just went bang and banged the centre-back about 20 yards away. And I turned right to Frankie and nothing had happened. And I went, we're going to do it today. We're going to win. I can just smell it off the players. And they just went on and got the job done. And I think the Ipswich games initially, my thought process was to go to obviously their place and not lose. I felt if we went there and didn't lose, we were going through, because I felt at home we would have beat them. And when we scored the early goal, I think Callum got down the side, cut it back for John, who put it in the far corner. I was really confident at that point. And then when we got back to their place, my mindset was Ipswich are always, at that point in time under Mick, come out and blast you for 60 minutes. See if they don't score, they'll run out of steam and we'll pick them off. And that's basically what happened. And we picked them off and we got the goals we needed. Yeah, so I was extremely confident in both games that we were going to go through.
So it sounds like the game plan worked well. Wembley itself, now I've got a nice wee photo ready for this for anyone that's watching the podcast stream. And thank you to Paul Chesterton and PHC Images for letting us use that. There's you in your sort of regalia after the game, lifting the trophy. How fond a memory is that for you, Alec?
Yeah, it was probably my most surreal moment, if I'm being honest, in my life that I've had. I think there's some places that you go to in the world and you look at it and you think that it feels as if it's not real.
Aye.
That was one of the moments for me when you're lifting that. And when we walked out for the first, when you're lining up with the teams, there's literally a sea of yellow and a sea of red, and you literally couldn't have picked two better teams to make it so diverse in terms of how different it was. And it was literally, there wasn't a spare seat in the house. And the day, perfect. It was hot. It was quite humid. There was no rain. I mean, everything. The pitch was perfect. It was nice and crisp. It was wet. You had the flamethrowers at each side when you walked out. Yeah, it was. I don't think I took it out really at the time.
Life's like that though, isn't it? Because life's that kind of thing where it passes you by, and it's when you reflect on it that the kind of gravity of the moment sets in. But what I'm trying to picture is, right, like you've obviously been in some big stadiums, right? But walking out, I've been to the new Wembley, right? As a fan, walking out and just seeing the sheer size and scope of it must have been crazy. That must have been an amazing thing. That must be, you get photographs in your head. Is that the photograph that's kind of stuck there?
Yeah, of course it is. And we have obviously got little mementos and different things. And I think my mum's got a picture of basically, they were right in the halfway line. They were fortunate enough to be in the Royal Box, so they took pictures there, and you can see the split between the stands right around the stadium. And
amazing.
And sort of photo grabs the magnitude of how big it is. So yeah, that like I say, it's one of the things when it's happening at the time, it's surreal, so it doesn't feel real. But now in reflection, when you look back on it, it was that'll always be one of my fondest memories.
I've got one question about that, right? And that is, you walked out in a suit and then you ran back in to get changed into your trackie. What was the thinking there? Was that a superstition thing, or was it just you see yourself very much as a tracksuit manager? What was the story there?
I don't know. I just think that I felt comfortable in a tracksuit. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm always sort of prowling up and down the line. I think the difficulty I've always had is I went from playing to managing like basically overnight. Do you know what I mean? I hadn't really prepared to be a manager. I wasn't something that I thought, yeah, I want to do that. What actually happened at Hamilton when I got the job was they gave me it as an intern for 5, 6, 7 games, and we'll take it to the end of the season. And I'm thinking to myself, I've had 2 really bad hip injuries. I took it for the 6, 7 games. And I'm thinking, if somebody else comes in as a manager, the likelihood is I'm the first person they're going to get rid of. Because I was so at the club. I'd been there for 9 years. I was the captain. I was running under 20s. I was doing the 17s. I had such an influence on things. If I was going in and I wasn't contributing anything on the pitch, it's the first person I'm moving. You know? So I thought at that point, if I don't take this, well, God knows what I'm going to do, really. So that's where my sort of mindset was at the time. And I'd always wore a tracksuit. So I just felt comfortable wearing the tracksuit. So when we walked out and we got the picture taken, for the biggest game that I'd had to that point in my career, I wanted to be in my comfort zone and do what, sort of be what I was type thing, if you like.
Aye. It's that thing you said earlier about no changing who you are. But I mean, I get the other thing of sort of obviously the sense of occasion demanded that you kind of wore a suit, and obviously in the photos it's nice to have that. And I don't know, obviously I know you're quite close to your mum. Was there a wee word for her saying you had to get your suit on, make sure you look smart?
No, I can't even really remember. I think just at that point, obviously there's certain etiquette when you go to Wembley, isn't there? You know, photo, the manager needs to wear a suit, and I was comfortable with that. And to be fair, I wore a suit to every game. So I wore a suit to and from every game. It's just when I got there, I get changed into my working clothes, if you like, for the game, and then I would get a shower and get changed back into my suit, and then go home. So I've got no. To be honest, I could probably see myself wearing a suit going forward, managing teams. Do you know what I mean? Less so than it wouldn't really have any bearing on me now than it did then. Do you know what I mean?
That's interesting. So do you feel you've kind of evolved and changed a wee bit in terms of, I don't know, as a manager, as a human being?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubts about that. I think that you live and learn, don't you? I think that as you mature, you get older. I think some of the things that I would maybe be more headstrong in then, I'd be less so in now. And you like to think you try and improve as a person, as a manager, as whatever you're trying to do. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that naturally as time goes by, I think you try and focus on what the more important things are rather than getting smaller things.
What's the biggest thing you learnt looking back for your experience as Norwich City boss specifically?
This is going to sound really quite strange because it's, in my opinion, it's a really mixed bag, and I know other people have their opinion. I probably didn't really have the experience of the transfer market then, because bear in mind, I went for a club, Hamilton, but we just signed free transfers. We had no money.
Aye.
So to then get thrust into. However, there's some signings that I'm extremely proud of, like say James Maddison, like say Ben Godfrey. I mean, guys like that who have went on and produced some of the biggest transfer fees Norwich have taken in. So, but I probably think at that point that was probably a bit that I was exposed to that I probably wasn't ready for.
So how did the signing process work when you were at the club? Obviously, I know Joe Savage was brought in, who was your scout at Hamilton, as one of the sort of chief guys in terms of watching the players. I believe David McNally was the guy, for the most part, who made sure that the T's and the I's were crossed and dotted in terms of the actual contracts. But how did the kind of procedure work if you were looking at someone to recruit?
Yeah, we had basically a team. I mean, I think people seem to think that managers just decide that we're signing him and signing him. See, as a manager, you've got so many things to do on a daily basis, so many things to prepare. Do you know what I mean? Players to speak to, you've got teams to sort out, you've got guys that are maybe not taken on in the squad, you've got guys who are not starting, you've got how they train that day, if their intensity levels aren't up, if they're dehydrated, if they're not eating well, if they're fell out with their girlfriend, if they're moving house. There's so many things, and that's only for your players you're sorting out. Then you've got your staff members as well who have got their wants and needs. So recruitment's an absolute full-time job for a team of people. So the difficulty you've got is I wouldn't necessarily say that one person always decides that player that you're bringing in, if that makes sense. What I want is the manager and the powers that be, whether it be the chief exec, whether it be the technical director, whether it be, I don't know, because there's so many labels for the type of people now, isn't there? But that person who runs the club, they would generally have the biggest influence whether it would happen or whether it wouldn't. You know, the one thing I'll say, David, in terms of opinion on players, in terms of whether we should sign them or not, didn't really get involved. David was very much, who do you want? I'll do my best to go and try and get them, which you couldn't really hope for anything better than that. And like I say, I think there were some signings that we made that didn't pan out anywhere near as well as we would like. And I think,
So, like, give a few examples of that, and then give an example of some of the ones that you think were the biggest hits in terms of, you've mentioned Godfrey Maddison, your time at the club.
Yeah, but I don't think that's fair. I mean, I don't think to turn around and say this player didn't do as well or that player. I don't think that's fair to do. So people make their own judgment on that. But, and like anything, the difficulty you've got, because somebody does really well somewhere else, it's never a guaranteed thing that they're going to do as well where you are.
No, that's true.
There's a lot of things that come into contention for that in terms of they've got to move house. Does the family get settled? Does the style of play suit them? There's a whole load of things that come into that. But like you
who were your biggest hits then? Who were the three? Because you mentioned Godfrey Maddison, but in terms of your time at the club, impacting the first team during your time there, which ones were you proudest of?
I thought Nelson Oliveira was an excellent player.
Me too.
I really, really liked Nelson. I didn't think we'd really seen the best of Nelson because I think the team and the club was in transition at that point, and I think if he came at a different time, I think Nelson would have been very, very good. I think
he would help keep us up in the Premier League.
I think he could have done, yeah. I think he could have. Yeah, I think he had the quality to do so. I think he had the know-how in big games. You know, Nelson had played like 30 times for Portugal.
Aye.
Ronaldo, so it wasn't a type of player that things were going to faze him. I think that Graham Dorrans was a fundamental signing for us. I think when I first went in, Graham was in the first window I brought in. And I think Graham gave us a calmness in the ball and a bit of quality that we probably maybe didn't have as much, and allowed me to move Johnny further forward at times as well when Wes was getting rested and wasn't playing, and gave us a very good balance. So, yeah, I think there was a couple of players there that came in, and obviously you've got to, like say, the thing is with James and Ben, when you sign those players, you're signing them in hope that they're going to develop. There's no guaranteed thing for them. You know, and I think if you look at Ben Godfrey, for instance, Ben Godfrey deserves all the credit that comes his way because the amount of development that lad's made for the day we signed him to where he is now is remarkable. And it comes purely out of hard work and determination from him.
And the raw ingredients were obviously there as well. In Dorrans, that's an interesting one because you can remember a very successful period in his career was at West Brom, and he was playing mainly coming off the left there. Now, do you think he was always naturally a kind of tempo dictator in the middle of the park? Do you think that was his kind of natural domain and that he had just adapted his game? Or do you think he's that versatile a player that he can do a sort of multitude of roles?
No, I think Graham did what most quality players do. I think Graham was a type of player when he was younger, and as he got older and he maybe wasn't as sharp and maybe wasn't as pacey, adapted his game. You know, I know Graham. I played against Graham when he was at Livingston as a kid. Him, Robert Snodgrass, Lee Griffiths, they were all on the same team at Livingston. I mean, they had a really, really good young team at that point. Equally so did Huey, the two MacArthur and McCarthy, and our team as well. So we always had really hard games against them. And Graham, in terms of technically, was superb. And at that stage of his career, he brought in exactly because we had Alex, who was like a sort of destroyer as a six. You know, Alex wasn't like a sort of quarterback type. He's not going to open the pitch up, but what he will do is he can smell danger, gets across, strong, physical, understands the game, like sort of real proper sort of stopper. Graham gave me that sort of second one to drop out and dictate the play, and then you come up and try and press him, and he can play past you, or do you let us dictate the ball? And that's the element that Graham brought to that team, which at that stage I thought was lacking, and he certainly brought that.
He was a lovely player. You mentioned Snoddy, obviously a hero to certain parts of the Norwich City fraternity, and I still think his set pieces are missed by Norwich City. He's a great set piece taker. Were you disappointed not to get the chance to work with him? Because obviously it was no a great deal of time before you came that he sort of departed.
Yeah, I've known Snoddy through other people for quite a long time, and I know he's a character.
He's a wind-up merchant we were talking about earlier on.
I think Snoddy's got one of the best traits you can have as a player, and I talk about this regularly about players that I've worked with, players that I've had, or whatever. The best players are the guys who influence games, and that's the best he had. He wasn't particularly quick, but you just gave him a few moments in key areas. He produced that free kick, or he produced that set piece, or he produced that cross, or he produced that goal that would change the tide of a game. And they players are they're worth a weight in gold, because you don't necessarily need to play well to win, because they can produce that moment of quality that can change the tide of a game.
Mm-hmm. Talking a bit about recruitment there, what did you think of the recruitment in the summer of 2015, sort of going into the Premier League season? Were you happy with the business that Norwich done? Now, I think me and you have spoken about this before, where it's a lot of people don't know the way that the Premier League sort of payments work in terms of when the money goes in the bank and you can actually buy players. Now, there was a lot of speculation going into that season about getting a striker in. Were you happy that we ended up eventually with Jumercy and Bacani? Was that, and he's a kind of cult hero to some of the Norwich City fraternity. What was he like as a character? How was it working with him? And were you happy with the recruitment overall, or is there areas that you would, even at the time, like to have done a bit more?
Yeah, I think the biggest difficulty, and this isn't a criticism, this is just a fact. I think the biggest difficulty, and I think Norwich found this last season as well, or the year before when they went up, but because Norwich basically is self-sustainable in terms of what comes in for the Premier League or what comes in for the Championship is used on the squad. Do you know what I mean? So if you go to some of the bigger teams in the Premier League, they'll be getting paid by the owners to supplement. So if they've got a shortfall of 30 million, the owners will put 30 million in every year. Mm-hmm. And Norwich is a sustainable model where the money that they bring in is the money they use on signings, and that's basically how it works. So that summer was frustrating, and to be honest, I didn't actually really understand or realise why at the time until more so once I'd left and then found out the dynamics. But their first signing that year was Robbie Brady.
Mm-hmm.
We signed Robbie Brady the day the Premier League money fell in the bank account. So the Robbie Brady deal basically went on for about 7 weeks. So I was talking to Robbie on the phone. We're saying, yeah, we want to get the deal done. We're talking to the agent, and I'm thinking, like, why are we not getting this done? And it was dragging on and dragging on and dragging on and dragging on. And then only once, obviously, you have conversations once you'd left. The reason being is the cash wasn't there. Mm-hmm. So the player, but we didn't have the money at the time. And that's the reason for that, is the fact that the cash wasn't in. Because people think that when you go up, you get 120 million slid into your bank. I think you get it, well, if memory serves me right, over that period, I think you get it in 4 instalments over the season.
Mm-hmm. And the first one comes quite close to the kickoff, doesn't it?
I think it was either the first week in August or the second week in August. It's something like that. It's like it was really close. But when you're a team that's went up, and what other people don't really understand is, see, when you go up, built into a lot of the players' contracts that you've currently got, their wages will either double or they'll get a third on top of what they've got. They've also got a pot of money that they'll get for going up, which is obviously they've earned by getting up. But what it does do is you've just pretty much added a third onto your wage bill, or you've doubled your wage bill. So if your wage bill says 30 million, you're 60 million right away when you go up. You're then also maybe committed to buying players that if you get promoted. So if you've maybe got a couple of players otherwise you wouldn't have got to try and help you get there, you might be in for 5 million for him and 10 million. So that's another 15 million quid away. Mm-hmm. And when you're in the Championship, that's an educated gamble, because you're thinking, well, if we've got him, we've got a better chance of getting there. But the problem we've got when we do get there, he might not be enough to keep us there, but we need to buy him for 5 million or 10 million or whatever. And then also the pot of money that goes to the players, the pot of money that then goes to the staff. So yeah, there's a lot of hidden costs in there that can quickly drain that cash away and leave you with not a lot of money really to invest to try and stay in the hardest league in the world, which obviously Norwich is found difficult to do for a few years.
The perennial yo-yo club, we keep hearing it. Now, Premier League season started pretty well. First win at Old Trafford for over a quarter of a century, which is obviously massive. So up until that point, right, Hamilton were plucky little Hamilton. Now in the Championship, probably expected to contend for promotion, as Norwich were in the English Championship. Get to the Scottish Premiership, and it's like, well, it's a lot easier to stay in the Scottish Premiership for a start, so there's kind of nothing to lose. You can approach games where, for the most part, if you take the exception of the much bigger teams, with a certain element of kind of maybe no gung ho, but like a forward thinking attitude. Now, the Premier League's obviously a very different beast in that regard. Every game's hard, and some of them are against super teams, like world-class players every week. So, did you adapt your mentality or approach a great deal, do you feel, and the team's style going into that Premier League season, or did you try and approach it the same way? Now, I mean, what was your thinking going into it?
Yeah, I think we approached it in the same way. I think we approached it with no fear. I think we approached it with an aggressive approach to go and try and win the games. I think what naturally happens in the Premier League humbles you pretty quickly. Because I think the Premier League's the only league that I've ever worked in where you can play well regularly for a consistent period of time and not win.
Aye.
And I think that happened to us in quite a few of the... I remember the game we played Stoke at home. It was one of the first games. I think Cameron scored an overhead kick and it got disallowed. It would have finished 2-2 at that point. But Jack Butland pulled off about 4 unbelievable saves that day. And if it was a boxing match, it would have got stopped. We would have won comfortably. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a boxing match, and when their chance came along, and listen, I watched Norwich in the Premier League, obviously not this season, but the season before, and I thought some of the football they played was excellent, but they lost. Do you know what I mean? And it's a hard one because what you'll have a group of fans that will say we need to win at any cost to stay in the league, and you'll have a group of fans that say no, I want to see good and excellent football and blah blah blah, and if we play well and go down, then that's acceptable. But it's acceptable to a point. I mean, so there's always a fine balance in that way. And I think that was probably my first experience a setback, if you like, as a coach. And to find that setback in the middle of a Premier League season for an inexperienced coach is difficult.
How did you handle that?
Just in terms of what though? Because
in terms of from a personal perspective, firstly, how did you handle sort of having that? Because to be honest, to that point, it'd been, I'm not going to say plain sailing, but it'd been an upward trajectory the whole time, right? Now, obviously, from a personal point of view, did it knock your confidence? Did it make you question your methods? Was there any of that element? And then from a squad perspective, how did you handle it?
I'd be lying if I said that I think naturally when you're not winning games, you start to question everything. I mean, you've got to. But I think as you get older, the one thing I have learned in football is sometimes you win and you don't play well. And sometimes you play really well and you don't win. But the simple fact is you'll be judged purely on results. Because in a game's time or in a month's time or in 2 games' time, nobody remembers the performance that you played well and didn't win. What they'll rhyme off is 1-1-5, 1-2. Do you understand what I mean? So performances are quickly forgotten. I think what happens is, you start to question naturally your methods. You start to question whether you're going about it in the right way. I think that my initial instinct was always to go and attack every team and go and try and win. And I think that when you're getting damaged by teams that have got real quality, and to be fair, I'd probably say certainly for the first half of the season, apart from probably the top teams, we didn't really get dominated by anybody. I mean, I think there was one game in my mind where we did. It was probably Southampton away. We get Stephen Whittaker sent off early doors, and they were like Sadio Mane played for Southampton at the time, and I put Robbie against him who's extremely quick. And I think Manny looked like one of the quickest things I'd seen in 2 legs, honestly. He was so quick that day. It was incredible. So I think for the first half of the season, we sort of attacked it in the manner which I wanted to. I think the second half of the season, I tried to find a way to basically try and keep us in the league. And sometimes I think you jeopardise, or you try and alter, try and manipulate.
So do you still think that was the right thing to do? Or do you think you should have maybe just stuck to your principles, so, as it were?
If I'm being honest, I'm not sure if it would have made any difference at the time. You know, because
why is that?
Well, because I look at Norwich last year or the year before, and they stuck to their principles. And like I said, I thought they played extremely well at times, but they still came down. Do you know what I mean? I think so. It's a really difficult one, because I think when you're on a bit of a sort of slippery slope and you're not doing so well, I think you'll have people saying you need to adapt and you need to try and change something because it's not quite working. And you'll need others saying, well, if you've got a plan, stick to your plan and do your plan. But if the plan's not quite going to plan at that point, what I think is quite easy to happen with players is, I think that building confidence is not an easy thing to do. But I think taking confidence away is really, really easy to do.
Aye.
And I think it can happen really, really quickly. And I think that football's a game about momentum. It really is. And I think it's a case of, it's not what you do, but it's how you do it. You know, I think that if you can convince the players and get them to a level where they really, really ultimately have got no doubts and believe in their mind, but that's difficult to do when you're not winning.
Aye.
You know,
no, and I think that's probably the challenge you faced at that point. Now, I don't know if you felt there was a point where there was a kind of turning point in terms of confidence in terms of anything, but one where I sort of noticed a real difference was following the defeat at St James's Park. Obviously 6-2. I mean, that's a fair pasting. Not necessarily reflective of the game as a whole, I would say, but I definitely felt, sort of watching from my position, I don't know if you reflect this opinion, but it looked to me like after that point, that was when you began to go, right, we can't go conceding this many goals. And truth be told, I think the squad's strengths lay in scoring goals rather than trying not to keep them out, especially at that level. So do you feel that was a turning point as well? Like that kind of, and I know it's dead easy, it's one of those kind of soundbitey things, this result was a turning point, but I definitely noticed a pattern, particularly after that, where it did just look a wee bit different, whether that was confidence, whether it was approach, whether it was whatever. It just seemed to be, for me, the point at where it pivoted.
If I'm being honest, I can't reflect on it and say it was a conscious decision at that point after that game. I think what you naturally do as a manager, but is when you feel ultimately your job as a manager is to try and protect your players and to put them into a system which is going to give them the best chance of winning games. Now that can be on transition and counter attack by sitting deep and hitting teams in transition. It can be by being really aggressive and playing on top of somebody. It can be pass and working the ball up the pitch. It can be turning the ball. You can do it in a variety of different ways. I think at that point, we'd always been very much in your face, very aggressive, try and play in the opposition's half, try and get on top of them to not let them dominate the ball and make the game a case of who can hurt who the most. You know, that's how probably I would have seen how my team played to that point. I think once your team starts to concede 6 goals in any given game, I think you then look at it and think, right, do I need to dial this back now? Now, what I will say is I can't reflect on that game in particular and say, yeah, when that happened, I changed this and I thought I would do that. That's certainly not in my memory at the moment. But it wouldn't have surprised me after that, where I thought, right, I need to try and protect the team a little bit more now. Do you know what I mean? I need to make sure we don't concede as many goals. We need to give ourselves an opportunity and a chance to stay in games and hope that we can. Because the simple fact is, see if you look at some teams that come up, I think there's certain teams that are suited to coming out of the Championship. And I think the way Norwich played, I think the way Fulham played, I think the way West Brom played, I think they were all suited to come out of the Championship. But I think if you look at it at the moment, none of them are suited to staying in the Premier League. So if you look at the teams that have came up, like say a Burnley, who have done it, a Crystal Palace, who have done it, and I'm not saying that that's the way you need to go about it, because I think Leeds have proven that you can go about it in a different manner, but I think it's extremely hard to do. I think that method of playing, the difficulty you've got is you're doing that against teams that are better at it than what you are.
Aye.
And that's where the challenge comes in. Do you stick to that and try and supplement the group and continually try and mould the group and get better players? Or do you try and find an alternative way of getting yourself a result that you need at that point in time?
No, and it's a fair question. So obviously, kind of came out the Premier League. How did you handle relegation personally, and how did the squad handle it? Now, I'd just like to touch upon, if you remember the Watford game, I can remember your interview after that Watford game, and it was not to butter you up too much, but I found the tone and the words that you said really inspiring. You took it completely on yourself, which I thought was a brave thing to do. And I don't know if that was just the old managerial trope of, like, I'll take the blame so as the players don't, or whether you actually felt that it was completely on you. So how did you feel after that relegation was confirmed? Because that was the first, I mean, obviously you lose games, you have bad runs, but that was the first real failure, let's be honest, of your managerial career. So how did you handle that?
Yeah, listen, I'd like to think I'm really quite straightforward. There's no sort of hidden agendas. You cannot, as a manager, I think, take all the praise that comes your way when it goes well, and you get a pat on the back, and you've done this and you've done that, and then when it doesn't go well, then start pointing the fingers everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Because the simple fact is, if you're going to take the praise, you need to take the criticism. And I got all the praise for the first bit that I did, but equally you deserve the criticism for the bit that doesn't then work out after that. Now, what you can always do is, there will always be circumstances, there will always be excuses, there will always be things that you could have done better, there is always things that are out with your control. However, they were probably all there when you did well as well. But you don't harp back to them because you don't need to. So I think at that point, when I said what I said, and I can't remember the exact words that I said, but I think it was probably a combination of both things, where I probably realised that in that season, that obviously I came up short and I didn't do what was required to keep the team in the league. Because the simple fact is, like when I went down, my job was to get the team out of the league. Job done, I achieved that. My second task was, can I keep the team in the league? And I didn't achieve that. So I don't think there's any getting away for that. And equally, the players are culpable as well because they naturally played in the games. But you've got to protect the players, because ultimately, if the club's going to move forward, they're the guys that are going to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, and like I said earlier, confidence is such a volatile and such a fragile thing that you need to try and keep that intact as much as possible. And that was my way of taking my responsibility, but equally trying to make sure that they hopefully were going to be in a better place for the challenge that was going to go forward for the next season.
So in terms of that challenge, what do you think was sort of the main difference in terms of the team in the Championship, sort of round two? Because the one stark thing, just looking statistically, is the away form. The away form was fairly abysmal, to be honest, in that second season in the Championship, compared to your run in the first season, where you seem to be winning just about every game in the road.
I think there was two things. I think that when you suffer a relegation with a team, I think naturally there's questions asked of each other. Do you understand what I mean? Because you haven't achieved your goal. It's a damaging experience to get relegated. And what you tend to find is with a lot of relegations is, and to be fair, I think Norwich have done extremely well since this time coming down. Because if you look at the midfield that took them up the first time, there was like and Leishner and Stiepermann. I mean, that was a sort of group of midfield players that sort of took them up. If you look at it this season, it's unrecognisable for that season. I mean, you've got Skip and you've got McLean and you've got Dowell. And I mean, so it's very, very. And I know there's a couple of different ones like Vrancic and there's some other guys that are still there. But I think what they've managed to do is evolve it. Do you know what I mean? Year on year. And I think that's gave them an element of freshness. And more so for the manager, if you can have that churn of players, your relationship with them is always fresh. It's not tainted, damaged in any way. And I think the difficulty I had, and I was quoted on saying it at the time, but the team at that point was always getting a little bit older. I think we'd suffered the relegation together. And I think what we probably found at that point was when we came down, a lot of the players at that stage were on good money and weren't really going to get a Premier League team because they'd came down, and were on too good of money for them to go to another Championship team. So it was difficult to churn the squad around a little bit to create that freshness and to create those relationships that you need that have not been damaged by a relegation. So, but strangely enough, like you say, we actually started the season pretty well. You know, we beat Blackburn quite comfortably, and I think come October, I think we're about the top end of the table. And yeah, we went through a spell. I think it was after the Fulham game. We played Fulham, we beat Fulham 2-0, and the game finished 2 each down there, and it really shouldn't have. We sort of played ourselves into trouble, and that was probably the start when it started to sort of decline a little bit.
Yeah, it was a former Norwich boy, Chris Martin, that grabbed the equaliser in that game. And then after that, there was a pretty torrid run, Alec. There was lost 7 of their last 11 games of 2016. Now, what went wrong there? Because that was like the first time in your managerial career that you've gone on I mean, for the most part, a losing run like that. And I mean, in terms of the dressing room, was there any sort of fracture appeared? Was there anything that you could kind of put your finger on to say, like, this is what really went wrong here? Because a run like that, it can't all be sort of bad luck or just things not going your way, you know?
No, it wasn't. I think some of the relationships at that point had started to sort of sour a little bit. It's difficult to say because it's always hard to put your finger on. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not just one individual thing. I think naturally, when results are not going so well, obviously players are looking at each other and looking at you, and equally you're looking at them. So I just think at that point we just didn't do well enough. I don't think the players were playing to their capability at that point, which, well, it's certainly my responsibility to get them to that stage. But I think equally, and I've been a player as well, irrespective of what my thoughts were on anybody, you still go out and give it your all every time you play. But I'll go back to a phrase I used earlier. It's not what you do, it's how you do it type thing. So I think when you're feeling the confidence and when everything's going well and you're feeling wanted and you're feeling loved, you get that extra bit that probably isn't there on other occasions, if that makes sense. And I think that when we had, particularly on the road, we had a couple of damaging defeats. That confidence quickly started to drain, and yeah, I think at that point, see with players at a club like Norwich, because they know and understand that they need to continually fight to get out of the league or fight to stay in the league. When that motivation is not there, and when it starts to not be as productive as where it should be, yeah, it can be a slippery slope. And like I said to you earlier, that confidence type thing can quickly drain away, really, really quite quickly.
And what did the period after that, what was that like? Because you were given a bit of time to try and steady the ship, turn it round. Did you at any point think you'd managed to kind of re-imbue the team with that confidence and that vigour and stuff? Or by that point, was it a bit of a losing battle?
I think at that stage, I was thinking we need to try and get to a transfer window to try and churn the squad around a little bit to try and freshen things up, you know. And we didn't get to a transfer window at that point, and that's pretty much what it was. But it's really, really difficult to put your finger on one thing. See, when you're involved in a club and it's as big a club as like Norwich, there's so many different dynamics that you try to keep a handle on. And things can spiral pretty quickly. And don't get me wrong, you can get it back. I think a lot of things are based on results, though. If you can get the results, it can hide a multitude of sins at clubs. But if results aren't going well, even the best run clubs can start to sort of dip, if you like.
Overall, are you quite proud of your sort of body of work at Norwich? Do you look back on the time fondly and think, well, I did a good job there?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think certainly if you look at a lot of the players that then went on and was successful for Norwich, a lot of them were there. I mean, the likes of your Ben Godfrey's, the likes of your James Maddison's, Max Arns in the academy, Jamal Lewis in the academy, the Murphys. So yeah, I think that there's still. I'd love to have my time again in the second season when we came down now, because I think I could have done better. I think I could have managed it better.
How so? What would you have done differently?
I would probably describe myself as a manager at that point where it was all or nothing type thing. Do you know what I mean? Because I put so many demands on the players that if it wasn't quite working, it wasn't going to be I wasn't a long-term manager, if you like, at that stage, I don't think.
Okay. I know, it absolutely does. So what you're telling me is now you try and look at things a bit more holistically rather than just game to game. Yeah,
well, not even just game to game. Just at that point, it was or nothing at that stage, really.
Because and did that mean you reacted quite sort of, I don't know, combustibly maybe if the team was rubbish?
Yeah, and I think what you've got with that is that can only happen for a certain amount of time.
And then it stops being effective, doesn't it? If you obviously cracking ups, because you always think, like, I mean, to relate it to school, right? There was teachers that could keep a class quiet with just sort of lifting their head or giving you a look, you know what I mean? And then there's ones that would just start shouting at you, and you would just keep throwing pencils about or whatever you wanted to do. So it's like that kind of balance, isn't it?
Yeah, but it wasn't really like that. I mean, I wouldn't say that I just cracked up all that. That wasn't really the case.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean that, but I just mean there's different ways to react, and what I think you're getting at is now you feel you would maybe be better at reacting to certain situations.
Yeah, I'd be much more balanced now. I think then not getting success in not games that I found extremely difficult, and I didn't really know how to cope by not winning, if that makes sense. I haven't been exposed to it. I was a really bad loser as a player. So when we lost, I would literally go home and I wouldn't go out that night. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I mean, I was a really bad loser. When I went into management, for the first 3 years or whatever it was, like you say, I basically went like and just won. So when I got to the point where I'm not winning as much, it was that was probably the biggest learning experience for me as a coach, was when that time came. And I wish now I could go back, because I think the way that I would manage now would give me longevity, if you like.
Aye.
Whereas at that point, the way I managed wasn't ever going to give me longevity.
So is that a change in your intensity, or is that just a change in how you handle your emotions a wee bit?
Both, I think.
Aye.
Both, yeah.
And is it your time at Preston, obviously, who are a club with different expectations, different standard of players? Is that basically you obviously get used to losing a bit more frequently as Preston manager than you do as Norwich manager, or even Hamilton under your tenure? So has that been the experience that's changed that, or do you think it's just getting older, your evolution as a person?
No, I think it's accepting sometimes that you're not always going to get everybody at 110% week in and week out, and how you then manage that to try and get it back round to the point where it's producing. Does that make sense?
Aye, it does.
Whereas I think a very little tolerance level for not producing at that point in time.
And do you think that created maybe a disconnect with some figures in the dressing room, and that sort of led to things going awry?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I think that's good. And listen, I think that I've always been the type that I probably try and look at where I went wrong more than other people have went wrong. Do you know what I mean? Because I think you learn more that way. I think if you continually point the finger and say, well, this was the problem, that was the problem. And I think when you're in it, it's difficult not to do that. But I think now that I've had time to reflect and look back on it, I think you can look back on it and certainly accept your feelings and your misgivings at the time when you now reflect on what happened with a sort of calm head, if you like, and look back on it.
Do you think when your contract was eventually terminated that it was the right decision for the club, and or do you think you were treated unfairly in any way?
I think the difficulty you've got is I think when the fans start to sort of turn against you, I think your time's always limited at a club, you know. And don't get me wrong, you can turn it around by winning games and getting results, but I think at that point, I think we'd have 8 or 9 games left, and I really needed to get to the summer to give ourselves an opportunity to try and sort of turn things around a little bit. But if I'm being honest, I've never felt any sort of bitterness or any sort of any sort of grievance or it's whatsoever. You know, I've always felt privileged that they gave me the opportunity in the first place. And listen, Delia and Michael, I've always got on with extremely well. And they were extremely kind to me when I was there, so that was really nice.
No, that's lovely. You mentioned a couple of the academy boys a few minutes ago. In terms of some of those academy talents, the likes of your Todd Cantwell's, Max Aarons, Jamal Lewis, did you sort of, because sometimes it's very, very hard to tell when a player's 15 or 16 if they're going to make that jump by the time they're 18 or 19. Was there any of those that you identified at an early stage and thought, do you know what, that's a top player in the making there, or have some of them surprised you with their development?
No, I couldn't honestly sit here and say that I expected them to do what they've done. I think the one that stood out for me out of the 3 of them, if I'm being honest, was probably Jamal, because his athleticism. You know, he was extremely athletic at such a young age. But no, I couldn't honestly sit here and take any sort of credit for saying that, yeah, he was going to be this or he was going to be that. There was people at the club and actually worked with the academy at that point in time, you know, because I think they signed young Max for Luton. I think he got him for Luton Town on a free. And there was a lot of people in the academy who were big fans of Todd Cantwell at the time. And Todd's went on and done terrifically well. So, yeah, I think at that stage it was difficult for me to say that, no, he'd have been this or he'd have been that. So, no, I can't say that.
So, obviously, Hamilton, you were there for a decade. Club's obviously still very dear to your heart. Norwich, not so long, but some great memories. Are you a Norwich fan?
I'm a Norwich fan. I wouldn't say I'm a Norwich fan, but I think for the memories that I've got, I'm probably... It's quite a difficult question because a lot of people have turned over since I've been there. Aye. But I think the best way I could probably put it is I like to see Delia and Michael do extremely well.
And obviously, seeing all the nonsense with the European Super League and all that. I mean, I've gone on various channels and spoke about how I think it's. I'd much rather be. So, just to give you my own story, Alec, the reason I started this podcast was because in that season where I don't know if you knew when I was doing the press conferences with you, that was with my Radio Norwich hat on. I was also the club commentator that year, so you probably heard some Scottish guy. I don't know if you watched any of the highlights that the club's put out, but during that season and that whole experience, and some of the times that we had sort of away for the pressers and that, it made me a Norwich fan. And that's one of the reasons that I started this podcast. But I've said in various, I'd much rather have a club that is maybe yo-yoing between the leagues, but you've got an owner that you know that cares about it. You've got an owner that and an identity. And that's one thing, just to kind of push in the question a wee bit more. Do you know, just think that it's a special football club in many ways, Norwich, because it's the one county club, it's right out the way. All the fans, like, if you go to Norwich, there's no, compared to loads of places, there's not that many folk with Man U tops on or whatever. You walk around the city, it's Norwich City tops, you know? And that is something quite special.
Yeah, I've said that before. I think, if you go to Norwich, Norwich is all consuming. It's everybody there really supports Norwich. That's the way I've always seen it. And yeah, I think it's certainly when you get to the Premier League, because these are big global businesses now. I think Norwich is an anomaly in that, because I don't see Norwich as a big global business. I see Norwich as a family club, which is run really well now and had a lot of success in recent years. Do you know what I mean? I think that to do what they've done over the last couple of seasons, to get up, maybe not stay up, but play a nice brand of football, come back down, to then rebuild that and to go back up in the manner which they've done, they've done extremely well. You know, I mean, in terms of the manager, in terms of the setup. You know, I never met Stuart Webber when I was there. Obviously, I'd left before he came in, but yeah, you've got to tip your hat to him and Daniel Farke in terms of what they've managed to do.
Would you have liked to have worked under Stuart Webber? And obviously, there's a new sort of thing happening in the British game. It's kind of catching up with abroad, where you've got the sporting director head coach model. And I have noticed during this conversation, you've described yourself as a coach, and that's been the parlance that you've used. I'm not sure if that's by accident, but would you be quite happy to work under a kind of sporting model like that, where you had someone that was in charge of the kind of, let's say, the general culture, and you were coaching the team?
How are they in charge of the culture? That's the bit that I don't quite get. What do you do with that?
So in terms of the entire culture around the sporting institution, the idea is that a sporting director will be in charge of everything from sort of training ground to stadium, from the lower levels of the youth team right up to the first team setup. And then the head coach is essentially in charge of the first team and maybe culturally things in the training ground and in the football pitch. But in terms of the club in a holistic basis, that lands with the sporting director.
I think most clubs are run like that anyway. Do you know what I mean? Because I think there's so much, like I said earlier, there's so much for the manager to concern himself with, and so much for the manager to do, that I don't think managers are like what it used to be. Do you know what I mean? Because there's so many different dynamics of clubs now. Clubs used to be a group of players. There wasn't any sort of real media attention. I mean, you had a couple of cameras that would come in. There wasn't agents on tap the way they are now. You haven't got social media then. Clubs have grown to the point where they're absolutely enormous now. So I think most managers, coaches, whatever the label is, I think their main priority is the team. You know, I think what they would like to have is an input into how things are going to go forward. But not, when I say an input, I don't mean making the final decision. I just mean an input in terms of having their voice heard. And I'm pretty confident that Daniel Farke will have exactly that.
No, it's definitely a partnership.
Yeah, so and I think that's the way it's got to work. So I think most clubs will be a partnership of some kind, but your main responsibility and your main role is to take care of the team and get results on a Saturday. And to be honest, everywhere I've worked, that's pretty much been what my job's been.
Fair play. Right, we're into stoppage time now, so I'm just going to hit you with some quick fire questions before we finish, if you're all right with that. So keep your answers nice and short and snappy. Or, I mean, you can go in a wee bit if you want, if you've got in particular to say. So, best player, ability-wise, you worked with at Norwich City. And if you find it hard to pick, I'll give you a top three.
Wes Hoolahan.
Aye, number one. Okie doke. Most important player during your tenure. So that's a different question. That's the one that was most important to the operation of the whole.
Johnny Howson.
Oh, interesting answer. Why Howson?
Because he could play in a variety of positions, and it could be a 6, it could be an 8, he could put tucked in off a side. Always fit, always played, always gave 110%. Yeah, no dramas with Johnny. Just got on with his work.
Cool. One player for the current Norwich City team you would have loved to have had in your own?
Buendia. Either or.
See, to be fair, Buendia is the obvious pick there, but I get what you mean by Pookie. And actually, I suppose I'm just going to fling one other wee question in. Would you like to have had a striker that Cameron Jerome was brilliant for Norwich City, but maybe someone that was just a bit more prolific during your time?
Yeah, I think number 9s they're worth their weight in gold, aren't they? You know, and I think if you look at Pookie, double figures in the Premier League, he scored over 20 goals twice in the Championship. Norwich's front line is what gets them out the Championship. I mean, if you look at the numbers they churn out, and Pookie's fundamental to that. So yeah, he's an absolute diamond for them.
That was an interesting point you made about the midfield earlier. I've kind of echoed that in a few things. Favourite manager you've come up against in your, I suppose, your career as a whole, but maybe Norwich.
In terms of how their team plays?
In terms of anything. in terms of the kind of good guy there, or if you've got different answers, the guy that you go in with the best, and the guy whose approach you like the best or admire the most?
I'll take out the guy that I got on with the best, and I'll just put the guy who I think I would go with Bielsa. I thought his teams were perfect.
Why is that? Because he sits in a bucket like your Willie, or did you just love his approach to the game?
Well, I think that he does this man marking system when he hasn't got the ball, right, which is quite easy to do. But to then be extremely expansive when you have got the ball and continually do that's not easy to do. And then to do it and you can't speak the language, I don't know how you do that. Because I'm thinking if I went to Argentina and tried to coach like that over there, couldn't speak a language. Remarkable, yeah.
I speak Spanish, so if you get a job at Boca Juniors, take me away, mate. I'll be your translator. Favourite game as Norwich City boss, and I mean in terms of performance. So Wembley would obviously be the easy shout in terms of occasion and what have you. But what was your favourite game in terms of performance?
I'm not quite sure. What was the game we beat Ipswich at home in the league? Was it 4-1?
Aye, but I think I've not got the result to hand here. I think that's right. So, because it was a derby, maybe go for that. My personal favourite, by the way, Norwich City 5, Nottingham Forest 1, when we had brilliant goal for Wes, brilliant goal for Johnny early on for the corner. Came out to him and he just hit that.
Yeah, we had another one as well at home again. Was it Brentford? I think we beat them 6.
We 5 or 6, wasn't it? I think it was 5 in that one. And then we beat Red. Oh no, that was after you, the Reading game. My bad. It was the team you built. Okie dokie. Were you offered any other jobs during your time at Norwich?
No, there was always rumours about a couple of different things, but nothing concrete. I think what tends to happen is people will sort of loosely put a wee sort of feeler out. But to be honest, at that stage, I had no interest in going anywhere really.
Fair enough. If there was one thing you could change, and you might have already answered this, but there might be a slightly different way you can interpret it. If there was one thing you could change about your time at Carrow Road, what would it be?
I'd like to have that second season when we come down back again.
Aye, similar to what you said earlier. Do you think Norwich City stands as your best body of work, or are you prouder of your legacy at Hamilton and Preston?
I'd probably do it in equal measures for different reasons, if I'm being honest.
Okay, expand on that.
Well, I think with Norwich getting the team up and being in the Premier League obviously was extremely successful for me. I think that to go into Preston and have them challenging for the top 6 for 3 seasons and sell over £20 million worth of players, which I think before that I don't think I'd sold anywhere near that in about 50 years before that. So, do you know what I mean? That's a different type of success in bringing a lot of Ben Pearsons and Ben Davies and Callum Robinsons and Jordan Hughes, who you've got, to bring them on and sort of give them the platform to go on and kick on. And then naturally what I've done at Hamilton. So in different measures, I'm probably equally as content, shall I say, in terms of what I've done.
Fair play. Slightly different tack. Would you ever take one of the jobs at the old firm clubs? And do you think that's ever going to be a realistic possibility for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think if Celtic or Rangers come knocking, it's always something you would have to sit and consider and talk about. I mean, there's no doubts about that, the magnitude of the clubs. Would it be a possibility? I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question. You'd have to ask them that. So, I don't know. I could see myself managing in Scotland again at some point. When that will be, I'm not quite sure.
But it's definitely not the next step for you.
Well, the difficulty you've got when you're not working is you don't know what your next step's going to be, because I don't know what's going to come along my way. I mean, if there is going to be a lot of opportunities or jobs in the summer or not. So I think at this point in time, I just need to bide my time and see what comes up.
Do you think you'd be a good international manager? Obviously thinking of Scotland in particular.
I don't know. I really don't know.
It's a totally different kettle of fish, isn't it? Because you're not working with the players week to week. It's camps, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if I had my choice, and this is obviously like fiction, but I think if I had my choice, I would certainly like to do it maybe later on. But I like the day-to-day contact with players. I like the intensity of working every day. So yeah, listen, obviously you don't know if or when or whatever happens if it does come up. But yeah, if I had a preference, I'd maybe like a stab at it later on.
What do you think of the current Scotland team? Do you think we can do in the Euros? Especially if it would be great if we could beat England.
Well, I think the team's got a really good balance about it. I think it's probably one of the best teams that we've had in recent years. I think the midfield in particular is really strong.
Good in the midfield areas. I think we've got options up front. Shea Adams playing for Scotland's obviously good. And it seems like Clark has kind of answered the Tierney-Robertson conundrum by playing Tierney as a left centre-back. Which one of them do you think's the better player?
I think it's hard to say better player because I think that Andy Robertson's strengths going forward. I think Tierney equally is really good at going forward, but I think he's certainly more, I would think, more defensively minded than Andy Robertson.
Aye, I mean, see the real strength with him, Alec, was, that thing that fullbacks have of when to press and when to stand off. Tierney had that innate ability for 16-17 as soon as he broke into the Celtic team, and it's something that takes certain fullbacks so long to learn, which is obviously a big thing. Final of the quick fire ones. What's next for you? I mean, are you hopeful of landing a job this summer? Are you hopeful it's going to be at championship level? If you could pick one that's a kind of realistic possibility, is there any you would maybe have your eye on?
I wouldn't pick one, obviously, because guys are in jobs at the moment, and that's an unfortunate thing that you've got to wait on working as somebody to lose their job. But yeah, I think I've done more than enough in the championship to deserve another crack at it. And yeah, that's certainly where I would be aiming. And I'm just hoping that something comes up in the summer. If not, I'll obviously just bide my time and hopefully get myself out and about once things open up for the coronavirus and go and watch a few different clubs, training and that, get some good contacts where I can go in and watch them. So yeah, we'll just wait and see what happens.
You give a phone for a coffee if you're north of the border?
Yeah, will do.
No, good man. Last one for me is just if you had a message for Norwich City fans who'll be watching this. I mean, I'm hoping there's going to be a wider demographic watch it, but if you had something that you wanted to say to Norwich City fans, what would that be? I just thoroughly enjoyed my time there, really. I mean, if I'm reflecting on my part. But yeah, my message would be good luck for the Premier League, and I hope we stay up. Do you think we can?
Yeah, of course you can.
Aye, perfect. That's a good positive note to end on. Thanks very much, Alex, for joining us, mate. It's good to catch up with you. And for once, we didn't get too deep into the tactical stuff because that's usually what tends to happen when me and you have a discussion. How annoying was that press conferences, by the way? Was that the one that bugged you the most, or was there others?
No, not at all. No, I think sometimes it was good because it allowed me to try and portray what I was trying to do and give people an understanding of why I chose to do certain things. So I think sometimes that can be helpful to give people an insight in terms of not just hosh-boshed it together. I mean, there's been a bit
Aye, no, good stuff. So thank you very much to Alex Neil. That's it for Hodge On Nodge this week, but the Hodgeythehack Express doesn't stop there. I'm going to end this podcast by announcing Hack and Tackle, my new no-nonsense podcast. So we'll just get you to wave and say cheerio, Alex, as I remove you from the screen. Thanks for joining us. But I'm going to end this podcast by announcing Hack and Tackle. That's my new no-nonsense podcast, which tackles all things in the wider world of football. And also kind of questions whether you should believe what you read in the papers and the competing agendas at everyone in the football world. So hopefully you'll be intrigued by that. I know I am. And it's going to make its debut as soon as tomorrow with a live stream. So keep your eyes locked on Hodgeythehack. So thank you to Alex for joining us, and thank you to all of yourselves for watching and for listening. Cheers on the Ball City.